All right, guys, so I thought this was a really fun article to look at. It says college conference expansion realignment scenarios, what each league should do, what will happen. And we're going to go through, this is a super in-depth article, and just look at the absolute worst case scenario for all of the Power Fives. And this article is so in-depth, they're talking about like the MAC best case scenario, Conference USA. They got it all. But we're just going to look at the Power Five guys. I was seeing on Twitter some people were saying there's not going to be much conference realignment news this week. And I was like, well, there goes my life. Like, I need news to happen. But now we should get something this week. I saw someone that was verified was talking about TCU joining the Big Ten. So another person that just randomly, Twitter verifies way too many people. I don't know what they're doing. But guys, let's look at this, starting with the ACC. So what is the ACC's worst case scenario? ESPN or some crafty lawyer figures out how to blow up the horrible grant of rights deal that locks the schools into their football media deal until 2036, and the SEC and the Big Ten have an epic battle to see who can get North Carolina, Clemson, Florida State, and Miami. Also maybe Virginia and Louisville being in on teams that could potentially leave the ACC. So yeah, I would agree. With the ACC, it starts and ends at that grant of rights deal. That's terrible, and it has all of those teams locked down through 2036. I'm sure they're all trying to get out of it. Maybe a lawyer, maybe ESPN. But does it really make sense for ESPN to try and get them out of that deal? Because they have the ACC network is owned by ESPN. Maybe it does because they also own the SEC network. They own so much. Oh my goodness. But yeah, that's the worst case scenario. If those teams can get out of that deal, that would enable Clemson, Florida State. Clemson and Florida State, I think there's no way they join the Big Ten. They would be SEC 100%. North Carolina, it could go either way. North Carolina could go to the SEC or the Big Ten. And Miami, I think there's zero chance Miami goes to the Big Ten. It doesn't make sense to me. I think Miami would also go to the SEC. And then the Big Ten would have to try and convince Notre Dame, and maybe they take Stanford with them. We've discussed that several times. But yeah, so that is the worst case scenario for the ACC. And then it says what will probably happen. The ACC will stay in place as is, but that won't keep everyone from trying to figure out how to steal the star schools. It'll be in discussions with the Big 12 and the Pac-12 to try and form an alliance to combat the Big 10 and SEC. In the meantime, it'll look to improve the current media deal and won't just sit by and wait for the inevitable defections of schools desperate to leave for more revenue. But how much can you really improve that deal by? The SEC is still going to be way more money. The Big Ten is still going to be way more money. So, yeah, the ACC is in such a tough spot right now. I would agree. Your best hope is maybe, unequal revenue sharing. They've discussed that because they're desperate. They're like, listen, we can't have teams like Clemson leave, so we got to give them way more money than a team like Boston College makes, instead of everyone flatlining and making the same amount. You give Clemson more, you give teams like Miami more, teams like Florida State more, based off of their ratings, their overall fan base, alumni base. So that'll be very interesting. Next, we have the American Conference. The worst case scenario, the Big 12 decides it wants to keep going and steal Memphis and SMU. And someone figures out that South Florida is a massive... Dude, South Florida, this is the second time today. South Florida is not consequential. Okay, I don't know. I was doing a video earlier today. It was like the best group of 5 schools, and it said South Florida was number 1. And it's like, I know they have a big media market. They're inconsequential. They're irrelevant. Nothing against South Florida. They play at an NFL stadium, but I don't know. But yeah, I think there's no chance of that happening. I don't think the Big 12 expands with more group of 5 teams. The Big 12 is either staying put or they're expanding with Pac-12 teams, in my opinion. So I don't think that's very likely. And then what probably will happen to the American, the expansion talk likely stalls for a bit, and the conference should be okay for now. I agree. I think the Americans should be fine. When you look, there's not too many enticing teams to, take from the American. They've already gotten poached several of their top schools like UCF. So, yeah, I think it's fine for now. Next, Big Ten. What is the Big Ten's worst case scenario? The SEC gets the prime ACC powerhouses before the Big Ten, and if that doesn't work, it wakes up in time to realize they can and should make Oregon, Washington, Arizona State an offer they can't refuse. So this person is saying the SEC should offer Arizona State into the SEC? Oh, that's interesting. They want the West. But I personally think the worst case scenario would be the SEC expanding with Clemson, Florida State, Louisville, and Miami, and then Notre Dame telling the Big Ten to kick rocks. Or the worst case is Notre Dame joining the SEC. That might be that's the worst case for the Big Ten. That is the absolute worst case. And then it says what will probably happen. The Big Ten will stay. We'll say it's not expanding and just fine at 16, and then it might bring on two Pac-12 schools to make things easier. So I'm guessing they're saying it would bring on Washington and Oregon to make things easier for USC and UCLA. Remember, the Big Ten is all about big schools and big markets. Okay, so yeah, I would say the Big Ten, I don't think they're going to bring on anyone until they get an answer from Notre Dame. At least that's what's being reported. We'll see what happens. Next, Big 12, worst case scenario for the Big 12. The Pac-12 gets its sh-tuff together and goes and gets Kansas, Oklahoma State. The Pac-12 takes Kansas, Oklahoma State, and takes on BYU before the fun gets started. The ACC decides it actually wants Cincinnati, Houston, and UCLA. Yeah, that's not realistic. To me, the Big 12's worst case scenario is an alliance between the Pac-12 and the ACC. Possibly a merger, but you can't really merge those two conferences due to the ACC's grant of rights deal, because it would open up and then that would allow Clemson to get out of the deal and join the SEC without having to pay an exit fee. So I think their worst case, the Big 12's worst case scenario, this is just something that this is not going to happen. The worst case scenario actually is an alliance, which they've also said this is not happening, but I'm just saying it's been rumored, an alliance between the Pac-12 and the ACC to shut out the Big 12. That's what's been rumored, and they're saying it's not happening. They said it wasn't happening. I'm saying that would be the worst case scenario. What will probably happen? The Big 12 might have to get ready to play more defense than it thinks. For all the talk about acquiring Pac-12 schools, there's just as big as a possibility that the reverse happens and or the Big 10 decides Kansas works. So obviously Kansas, the academics, the basketball, that's why the Big Ten would want Kansas. There's been a lot of talk of Kansas to the Big Ten. And at this point, before the Big Ten added USC and UCLA, the idea of bringing in Kansas was a little ridiculous because you're bringing in another horrible football team. We've already got a lot of those in the Big Ten. But now with another football superpower like USC and another solid football team like UCLA, you can afford to bring in Kansas. This is a ruthless situation, but the Big 12 will try to create a tie with the Pac-12 and or ACC while thinking about trying to figure out how to expand with some of their schools. Okay, so I'm not sure what they're trying to say by create a tie. But either way, we'll move on to keep going. So they have MAC expansion options. MAC's best case scenario: Ohio State and Alabama join the MAC lands Ohio State. It makes sense. The geographics make sense. Ohio State to the MAC. Notre Dame to the MAC, their best case scenario. Now it says their best case scenario, all 12 schools stay in place and the conference is able to land Army. Army to the MAC, I would love to see that. Who will bring attention and a few parts of the Conference USA might strengthen the position. So I don't think the MAC's going to do anything. And then worst case scenario for the MAC, the Big Ten and the SEC become too strong and the other 3 Power 5 conferences figure out how to combine forces. The MAC doesn't become the WAC, but it struggles to stay up in the FCS status. Wow. Yeah, I mean, I don't think they really have a worst case scenario. Are they really in danger of losing? You know what? I think that's a bad thing because none of the MAC teams are any good. Maybe the only school I could see maybe like another conference wanting from the MAC. Maybe Northern Illinois. Maybe Toledo. But other than that, yeah, there's just no one. Mountain West, worst case scenario. Fresno State, San Diego State, and UNLV are off to the Pac-12. Well, the Pac-12 would be screwed in that situation too. Boise State is in the Big 12 or the Pac-12, probably the Big 12, and Colorado State gets a big pitch from the Big 12 too. Yeah, I mean, I think the Mountain West is set up really well here. And so it says best case scenario for Mountain West. The Mountain West figures out a stronger media deal, the lack of Tier 1 research AAU status for most of its league's most attractive schools matter to the Pac-12 and Big 12, and everything stays in place. No. Their best case scenario is the Pac-12 dissolves. Because if the Pac-12 dissolves, it's already been reported Oregon State, Washington State, California would all be interested in joining the Mountain West. So their best case scenario is not to stay the same. They would actually be adding 3 potential Pac-12 schools if the Pac-12 dissolves, where you would see Oregon and Washington going to the Big 10 or the Big 12, and those other 4 schools going to the Big 12, Arizona State, Colorado, Utah, all going there. Next, we have the Pac-12 worst case scenario. Oregon and Washington really are gone to the Big 10. Arizona and Arizona State really are gone to the Big 12. And Colorado is off to the Big 10. Well, Colorado's not going to the Big 10. I'll tell you that much right. Well, maybe they want the Denver market. I don't see Colorado in the Big 10. Colorado is off to the Big 10 or Big 12. The league becomes a sad shadow of its... No, I mean, that's not the worst case scenario is not that it becomes a sub-conference. The worst case scenario for the Pac-12 is that it dissolves. Okay, folks? It might dissolve completely, meaning it's not going to exist anymore. That's actually the worst case scenario for the Pac-12. What will probably happen to the Pac-12? How fast can the Pac-12 move to fix this? Crack up the media deal now. That's in the works. Try becoming besties with the Big 12 or the ACC. They've already tried that with the ACC and an alliance. In some sort of a realignment that keeps everyone from hitting on each other's members, and try to chill on the Tier 1 research status. San Diego State, yeah, you're not going to want to add UNLV to your conference if you're the Pac-12, in my opinion. SEC worst case scenario. There's no reworking the ACC media deals. The Big Ten gets even stronger. I'll read it off first. The Big Ten gets even stronger with more great acquisitions, and in a strange twist, all of a sudden, Texas and or Oklahoma start to get chilly feet and make this a bit bumpy before joining. So I don't think that's going to happen. They're going to make too much money, so they will definitely be in the SEC. I think the worst case scenario, the media deal, the way it works with the ACC, it shuts out the SEC from expanding, and the Big Ten gets. So the ACC teams are off limits in this scenario for the SEC. The Big Ten gets Notre Dame. The Big Ten gets Washington. The Big Ten gets Oregon. And the Big Ten snipes another team, maybe from the Pac-12. That would be the worst case scenario for the SEC. But, this is all speculation. We'll have to see. And that is going to do it for this video, guys. So, very fun article to look through. Worst case, best case, what's actually going to happen for some of these schools. It'll be very interesting to follow. And hopefully we'll get some big news. Although, there's been some reports that it's going to be a quiet week. Apparently, there's some media days happening, so the realignment stuff is kind of going to be in the background. We will see. I'm hoping for some big news. But either way, guys, make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.